All right. What I want to talk to you about today is extraordinarily foundational to everything that we believe, to the there's that word, narrative, of the Bible. When we look at the Genesis narrative, we see the Abrahamic Covenant is a complex collection of unconditional divine promises that are stated and restated over a period of years within a series of 6 recorded encounters between God and Abraham. We think of, first of all, let's make sure that we all are on the same page regarding what a covenant is. That's critical. Let me check my time. Okay, good. A covenant is a form of contract. It is a very common form of solemn contract, found especially, we see it very, very commonly used within the ancient world of the Bible, the ancient Near East. So a covenant requires, like any contract, requires 2 or more parties to make this agreement. And we see in the Abrahamic Covenant this collection of promises that God shares with Abraham. Now, if we think about a covenant that is continually expanding and that more information is being disclosed regarding this covenant over 6 successive encounters, we can think of it more like throwing a stone into a lake. When we throw a stone into a pond or a lake, a body of water, we know what happens, and we've all done it. You throw the stone, and immediately there is a circle that is where that stone hit. But immediately thereafter is a series of concentric circles around that initial splash zone, that core. And that concentric series of circles expands and expands until you have a very nice, big, giant circle around the original splash zone. That's how we can think of the Abrahamic Covenant over 6 encounters. So if you think about the core, the first, and then you got 5 rings around it that expand and gives us some additional information. So let's just get right into the text. And because there are 6 encounters with Abraham, and then there are additional encounters with Abraham's son Isaac and grandson Jacob, we're going to be looking in various different, over the course of a week, but this morning we'll be looking at a course of various different passages. But the good news is that they're all in Genesis. So if we can find the first book of the Bible, we're in good shape. Now we look for Genesis chapter 12. And in Genesis chapter 12, verses 1, 2, and 3, Genesis chapter 12, verses 1, 2, and 3, we see the initial encounter between God and Abraham, where this covenant is introduced. So in Genesis 12, verse 1, we read as follows. Now the Lord said to Abram. Now, first thing you need to know is that Abraham is not called Abraham at this point. His name will be changed later on. Let me just say modified from Avram. Abraham is a modification of Avram. And Avram simply means high father. Okay, not high father. Hi, Dad. Exalted father. The Lord said to Avram, and Avram at this point is in Mesopotamia. He's in what we would label Iraq today. Okay, Ur is the city. It says, "Go forth from your country. Go forth from Mesopotamia. Go forth from Ur, and from your relatives, and from your father's house. Lech lecha, go, traverse, travel, leave, depart. Go to the land which I will show you. So God couldn't provide even the name of the land for Avram. He didn't provide Google Map, not Siri, nothing, not even a AAA triptych, for those of you who remember those. It says, go to the land I will show. So start moving. Maybe the Lord said in this general direction, okay? I'll tell you when to stop. Go to the land I will show you. And I will, now from verse 2 through we have promises. The promises begin. Now, I said this is an unconditional covenant. And when I say unconditional, I mean there are no ifs or buts or thens regarding the promises that God makes to Abraham. It's all just a series of, I will do this for you, and I will do that for you. Not, if only you do this, then I will be sure and do this. I'll live up to my end of the bargain. However, having said that, while the covenant is filled with unconditional promises that have no ifs or that's, or thens, the receiving of the covenant is very much conditional. It's very much conditional. You do not get to collect $200 until you land on go, right? And so Abraham must go, okay, in order to collect the promises or the covenant that God makes with Abraham. Okay, nothing happens if Abraham decides to stay in Ur, if Abraham decides to stay in Mesopotamia, right? But everything begins to commence. The clock begins to tick, and the covenant moves into position the moment that Abraham lech lecha, he goes. Okay, so here's what God is going to do, starting in verse 2. I will make you a great nation, and I will bless you, and make your name great, and so you shall be a blessing. Now, in the Hebrew language is an interesting language in that it is dependent. Does anybody know Hebrew here? Anybody familiar with a little bit of Hebrew? Okay, good. It's dependent on what's called the vav consecutive. Okay, the vav is it's simply an and. Okay, so the consecutive simply means and. So it's like a series of Legos that we connect one to another, or a series. When my son was very young, he was interested in Thomas the Tank Engine, right? So we had a lot of train track around, and we had a lot of little toy trains. And my son delighted in connecting all the trains together until you had one very, very long train. He said, look at my beautiful train, Dad. And indeed, look at all the links that you have, all these trains linked up. And that's how Hebrew is. Concepts that are linked up together. English likes to stick periods and commas and insert other words, break it up a little bit. Hebrew is just, it intimidates you almost. It overwhelms you with this and this and this and this. And so when we see God's blessings and God's promises for Abraham, it's I will do this and I will do this and I will do this and I will do this until you have this pile of blessings, of promises that God made to Abraham. So let's just unpack a little bit what we see here, starting in verse 2. I'll make you a great nation. Now, that does not mean great in the qualitative sense that those who are going to come from your womb are going to be the greatest and the bestest and the most wonderful nation that anybody ever saw. And everybody who looks at that nation is going to say, wow, what a nation! How amazing! I had no whistle wet to be able to make the sound, but you can fill that in your imagination, right? This is not qualitative. This is quantitative. I'll make of you a great nation, a numerous nation, a nation that is extraordinary in its numbers, which we learn later on. We don't know this yet, but we discover shortly, that Abram actually has no children. And he's, even at this point, is an older gentleman at this point. He qualifies for the AARP membership at this, and he has no children. So for God to promise that Abraham will become a great, numerous, quantitative nation that's an extraordinary promise, and it's one that would have gotten his attention most assuredly. And I will bless you. Now, this is the term that we use all the time, especially here in Texas, right? We're always blessing this heart and that heart and blessing all kinds of people. And every time somebody sneezes, of course, we say, God bless you. But what is it that we mean when we say bless you? What is a blessing? What does it mean for God to bless Abram? Promise of blessing. It's a word that's almost entered into, I'd say Christianese, that we can say, we use it all the time. But if I were to be man on the street with a microphone and start interviewing people, how many people on an average Sunday morning, let's say, would be able to define what is meant by bless? Well, to bless means to attribute, very simply put, to attribute good toward. Okay, the attribution or the desire for good to befall the person on the receiving end of the blessing. We know this intuitively when someone sneezes and we say, God bless you, right? Why do we say God bless you after a sneeze? It's an automatic reaction for most of us now. And the reason is when I sneeze and you say, God bless, you're noticing that, he just sneezed. That might mean that some ill health is either upon Steve or coming my way. And so instead of the ill health or to counter the ill health, you say, may God bless you. In other words, with good health, with antibodies, and with good vitamins and bodily response and red blood cells and everything else that you need to be able to conquer any germs that are coming your way. So I sneeze, you say, God bless you. It's the attribution of good, in this instance, good health, toward me, right? So that's what we mean by bless. And so God, when he says, I will bless you, means I will desire and I will perform good toward you. Because God doesn't just desire, he has the power to back things up. So he says, I will bless you. It's not only good wishes, right? Be warm and be filled. Okay, that's not what God is saying. He's saying, be warm and be filled, and I will be the one warming and filling you. Okay. And so you shall be a blessing. So imagine that we're adding Legos upon Legos or trains to trains. So you'll be a numerous nation. I will bless you. You will be a blessing. Oh, I forgot one. I'll make your name great. Make your name great. Now, we've already seen this word great, and we decided that it had to do with quantity, not quality. Well, is that true in this phrase, I'll make your name great? Is Abraham going to have, 8, 9 different names, 10, 12, 15 names? So we're going to multiply names for you? No. In this, it has to do with qualitative. That's why context, of course, is everything, right? We can't be mechanical and say, well, this word means this here, and therefore it must always mean exactly the same. Whatever the spectrum of range of meaning that a word has, we decide at that point contextually what it means. So to have a great name is not quantitative, multiple names. He only gets 2 as far as we see, Avram to Abraham. That's not many names, not quantity, it's quality. In other words, you will be of great renown. You will have great reputation. And here we are, approximately 4,000 years from the time of Abraham, give or take a decade, and we are still speaking reverently, respectfully, with admiration for Abraham. In fact, we think of ourselves, in the words of Paul, as sons of Abraham, those who possess the characteristics, specifically faith, of Abraham. And of course, not just believers in Jesus, not just Christians, but Jewish people revere Abraham still, of course, and Muslim. 3 world religions revere Avram, Abraham, and still speak of him with the sincerest and deepest tones of respect. So, great nation, quantity, bless you, attribution of good, make your name great, you will have a great reputation, a renown, and so you shall be a blessing. So what God gives to Abraham, the attribution of good, Abraham and his progeny will be able to turn around and bless others in their sphere of influence. And in verse 3, we have what I refer to as the E equals MC square of Scripture. I will bless those who bless you, and the one who curses you, I will curse. Theologians use the fancy term to describe this of retributive justice. Retributive justice. I simply use the easy words, God's holy karma. Okay? As you deal with the Jewish people, God will deal with you. As you deal with the children of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, so too God will deal with you. And it is an inexorable law of the universe, of history, and as we look back over the past 4,000 years, not excluding, but including our own century, we can see this play out on the world stage. Those who bless Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob's children will receive blessing. Those who curse, those who treat despicably, will eventually get what is coming to them. So you will reap what you sow in relation to Israel, to the Jewish people, to the progeny of Abraham. And we don't see Isaac and Jacob here, but the covenant is reiterated with the son, Isaac, and with the specific grandson, Jacob. So the children of Israel. And in you, all the families of the earth will be blessed. In you, whatever Abraham has and whatever Abraham passes down to his progeny, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, 12 children of Jacob, onward, children of Israel, in Abram's seed, in other words, the families of the earth, the nations of the earth will be blessed. What's another way of saying the families of the earth or the nations of the earth? It's simply, very, very simply, everyone who's not Jewish. Everyone who does not conform to the pattern of children of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, right? So if you are, in other words, if you're a Gentile, God is including you in his plan, his program, in his covenant with Abraham. Now, of course, who is this covenant being made with? It's not being made with Gentiles. It's not being made with Christians. It's not being made with the families of the earth. It's being made with Abraham and his progeny. But that does not mean that those who are not Jewish are an afterthought, or that God doesn't care, or that God hasn't taken a concern for non-Jews. Abraham at this point, after all, is the non-Jew. Abraham's a Gentile. Right? He wasn't born Jewish. There are no Jews until God calls Abraham. And then you have the first Hebrew. You have the first Jewish family. But until that point, everyone is a Gentile. And so it is very, very important to know that God has the world, the nations, the Gentiles, on a macro level, on a group level, and on the individual level, in his mind, in his heart. So, in other words, baked into the recipe from the beginning of God's plan and program for the Jewish people is a deep-seated concern for the nations of the world, for the peoples of the earth, for the Gentiles. In fact, I often find that this bears repeating in our troubled times. The Bible does not speak of races. The Bible does not speak of colors. The Bible speaks of two people groups, okay, within one race, the human race, all right? Human race. Right? And you have Jews and you have Gentiles. And God's got a special plan and program, some of which begins to overlap at certain points, two currents that are running together and sometimes meet up together. But God has plans and programs for Jews and for Gentiles. And we see that beginning right here. Because let's face it, after the first 11 chapters of the Bible, we can consider to be big picture prologue. It's prologue, right? Big picture human race. And then all of a sudden, we begin to zoom in, starting in Genesis 12. And what is the Bible but a family saga? The story of one generation and the next generation, and the next generation, and the next. So it used to be a book I used to read when I was a kid, 5 Little Peppers and How They Grew, right? And this is the story of the Jewish people in this family and how it begins to expand over time and geographic space. That's what the Bible is, after all. Well, anyway, that's those 3 verses. That is the beginning. That is the initial stone throw into the pond of the Abrahamic Covenant. That's the core of the covenant. Well, we haven't seen what the land is, what the borders of the land that God will give Abraham. Will he give it to Abraham? Will it belong to Abraham forever? Will it be a possession for Abraham's descendants? For how long will it be the possession of? We don't know any of this stuff. Okay, just the basic introduction right here. Boom. But we don't have to go very far, just verse 7, to see after Abraham begins to move, right? Nothing kicks in until Abraham starts to move, until he goes from his land. But now we see that Abraham has entered into Canaan. That's the land. Now, it tells you in verse 6, the big obstacle that faces Abraham faces a lot of obstacles in seeing how this covenant is going to come through. One of which, of course, is his advanced age, and not only his advanced age, but the advanced age of his wife Sarah. So that's one obstacle in his way. But now, regarding the land that God will show him and what Abram's relation to the land is going to be, tells you in verse 6, one very, very obvious obstacle. Now, verse 6, the Canaanite was then in the land. Now, that's not like just background material that Moses wanted to include, just to, well, once upon a time there were people and the people lived in the castle. No. This is, Abraham's entering into a land that is already inhabited. And later on, of course, we know that this land is going to be given to Abraham. We haven't seen it yet, but the land is going to be given to Abraham and his descendants. Now, the obstacle, of course, is the fact that there is already a population there. Okay. So the Lord appeared, verse 7, to Abraham and said, to your descendants I will give this land. God, it's like, from Abraham's perspective, imagine, what is it? Was it cost you money, Lord? Does it cost you power and effort to actually deal out details? Why are you doling them out one little aspect at a time? Couldn't you just lay the whole thing out on me? Right? Of course, we could just as easily say that regarding the Bible. Why do we need 66 books? Lord, couldn't you spell the whole thing out with Moses? Okay. And then sometime later, Jesus came and we can hear. And boom, what else do we need? Lay it all out on us. What is this why do we need something like messianic prophecy? Why do we need prophecy at all? Just tell us to do it right then and there. Right? Don't dole it out over time and geographic location. But that's not how God does. God only gives us a certain bit, whatever we can handle, at the time that he or that his people can handle that information. And so we, thousands of years later, look back and say, well, we have the whole 66 book of the Bible. We have the big picture. How come some of this stuff wasn't obvious to the people at the time? Why didn't they have the insight that we have? Why didn't they come to the conclusions that we did theologically? And the reason is that God simply doles out information over time. It's called progressive revelation, right? And then we looking backwards in history, we serve as every pastor is a detective, right? Every theologian is a CSI officer, right? Right? Examining the evidence, piecing it together with other evidence, making sure it collates together into some kind of a system that makes sense, right? Not everybody has a system theologically that agrees with everybody else's, but we all have the big pieces, right? It's how we arrange the big pieces with some of the little pieces together, and that creates a certain variety of conclusions theologically that we can arrive at, but we certainly cannot vary in the conclusion that we arrive at regarding who the Lord is, how we are saved, who Yeshua, Jesus is, who the Messiah is, the Messiah is coming back, what he does for us then, now, and in the future, etc. There are certain things that we all agree on. It's but how we arrange those pieces. But anyway, so we have this additional piece of information. Abraham arrives in the land, and he sees the Canaanites are in the land, but God tells him, to your descendants, I will give this land. And then does a Houdini and disappears, right? That's the end of the vision. That's the end of the conversation, right? It's the end of the appearance. But Abraham, I'm sure, had questions in his mind. Like, well, how is that possible, seeing that there are so many other inhabitants already in the land? And to your descendants I will give this land. Does that mean that I do not get the land, that the land is not going to be for me, but it's only going to be for the next generation or somewhere in the future? Which descendants? How many generations hence are going to possess this land? For how long are the generations, the descendants, going to possess the land? What are the boundaries of the land that you are promising here? None of those questions are answered. But we have just now done the first two encounters. But we don't have very far to go to see the next encounter, which is in chapter 13. Now, most of us, instead of focusing on the Abrahamic Covenant in chapter 13, we like to focus on the story that immediately, the narrative that immediately precedes it, which, as you're familiar with, it's the story of Lot and Lot, remember, is Abram's nephew. And again, family member. So if Abraham is thinking about descendants, then, of course, in the ancient world of the Bible, descendants would be your extended family. Perhaps Lot is involved in that. And so he's living together, dwelling together with Lot. But Abraham and Lot, because Abraham is nicely well off, have plenty of flocks, and the flocks of Lot and the flocks of Abram cannot get along. The herdsmen, they simply cannot get together. So Avram says to his nephew Lot, let there be no strife. This is verse 8. No strife between you or me, nor between my herdsmen, your herdsmen. We are brothers, family, we're kinsmen. Is not the whole land before? We got a lot of land that's not inhabited right now that we're enjoying because they're living like Bedouins, traveling, tents. Please separate from me. If you go to the left, I'll go to the right. If you go to the right, I'll go to the left. And so Lot lifts up his eyes, sees the valley of the Jordan, that it was well watered everywhere. This is before, parenthesis, the Lord destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah. We see that go down later on, chapter 19. But like the garden of the Lord, like the land of Egypt, as you go to Zoar. Now, I've never been to the land of Egypt. As you go to Zoar, I'll just take it on faith that was a well-watered, impressive geographic area. So Lot chose for himself all that juicy land, all that well-watered land, the valley of the Jordan, and he traveled eastward. Thus they separated from one another, and Avram settled in the land of Canaan, while Lot settled in the cities of the valley, and moved his tents as far as Sodom. Now, we know that Sodom is wicked. I'm not going to say anything about living in the city, okay? But generally, big cities are challenges, and this particular big city was a particularly large challenge, and it was filled with sinners against the Lord. But we surrender that storyline. That's for you to look at later on. That's not the Abrahamic Covenant. Now, verse 14, we have this next encounter, the third encounter. And the Lord said to Abraham, after Lot had separated from him, now lift up your eyes and look from the place where you are, northward, southward, and eastward, and westward. In other words, look in every direction. For all the land which you see, I will give it to you and to your descendants forever. Now, when we read the Bible, I'm a simple man, and I have a simple technique for reading the Bible and making sure I don't leave any details behind. And that's simply to ask of the Bible 6 interrogatives of each passage: who, what, where, when, how, and why. If I ask these questions of every passage, then I don't leave any detail behind, or at least I don't intend to leave any detail behind. Much like when we were learning to drive, and there was a 21-point system that you needed to go through before you got into your car and before you turned that key to back up when you're first learning. Right? You walk up to your car, look at the tires, okay, everything looked good, okay, you sit down in the car and you check all your mirrors, your side mirrors, you check your rear mirror, right? Check your seat. Is your seat in the right position? Check everything, make sure everything is right. It's a very mechanical 21-point system. But now that I've been driving for decades, I don't consciously do that anymore. I just get in and I drive. And I'll notice if my mirror is out of whack, or if my wife has driven the car and the seat is in the wrong position. I know very clearly, because my knees won't be able to fit into the car under the steering wheel. But point being, it's an automatic process for me. And so now the application of who, what, where, when, how, and why is likewise automatic. But sometimes it's good to go back and say, okay, well, what is the who, what, where, when? So God says, lift up your eyes and take a look in every direction. For all the land you see, I will give it to you and your descendants forever. So Abraham and his descendants, that's the who. What's the what? God giving the land. Right? What's the when? Forever. Okay, but I will give. So when does that act? I see a will. That doesn't mean that starting this moment. When I see I will give, it usually means that that has to do something with the future. Okay, so when does that kick in? And I also, regarding the land, what are the parameters of the land? Well, God said, look north and south and east and west. Look in every direction. But remember, Abraham was already AARPH plus. And I know that when I reach a certain age, my eyes were simply not what they were at a younger age, okay? And so let's say that Abraham's eyes are not as sharp and eagle-eyed as when he was 25 years of age. How far did his eyes extend? Does your possession only extend as far as your vision allows at your advanced age? Well, it's a question that I have going forward. Verse 16, however, tells me now that I will make your descendants as the dust of the earth. Well, what do you mean by that, Lord? So that if anyone can number the dust of the earth, this goes back through the Genesis 12 passage, that quantitatively I will make you a great nation. In other words, many descendants will come. Got it. Okay, so if anyone can number the dust of the earth, then your descendants also will be numbered. Well, that's good, but it doesn't answer the fundamental question. So we're going to have a great nation, but you already told me that. You're just now expanding that promise. I still want to know, what are the boundaries of the land that you're giving me? When will it commence? And all the other questions that I may have. But now verse 17, God says, arise. I know your eyes are not what they were. Walk about the land through its length and its breadth. So as you can look north, south, east, west, don't just rely on the eyes. As you're walking, look north, south, east. Walk, take a walk. It's good. At your age, it's good. You need the cardio. You need the exercise. For this land, I will give it to you. So it's not just the descendants of Abraham, or Avram, but it will be Avram himself who will receive this land. But again, you have this, I will give. When I tell my son that I will pick up a hamburger on the way home from work, right? It doesn't mean that the hamburger is his right then. It means he's going to have to wait. I will. And there's some ambiguity as to when I'm going to get back. Like I'll speak at church, my congregation on Saturday mornings, and the service ends at 12:15, 12:30. But I never know if I have a meeting afterward, or if somebody wants special prayer, or if somebody wants to just hang out and ask lots and lots of questions, or we have new visitors that I'm going to have to spend some time with, or if somebody invites me out to lunch. So I always know that I'm coming home on Saturday afternoon, but I may not know the time. But my son will have to wait whenever it is that Dad gets home, some unspecified future period of time. I will bring you a hamburger on my way home. So walk through the length of the breadth, for I will give it to you. That is the third encounter. The fourth encounter is big. It's really big. It's found at 15. So if you're keeping track, 12, 1 through 3, then 12, 7, then 13, 14 through 16, to be your next one. And now your fourth one is going to be chapter 15, 1 through 21. Oh, we got 21 verses now. That might reveal some details. And you got room there. You got some lexical room to real estate to unpack some concepts. Maybe we'll get some details here. After these things, well, you know what happens in chapter 14 is the War of the Kings. It's very exciting. And he meets Melchizedek outside of Jerusalem, and Abraham tithes to him. But after these things, the adventures of Abraham, after these things, the word of the Lord came to Abraham in a vision, saying, "Do not fear, Abraham. I'm a shield to you. Your reward shall be very great." Now, when I see, and there are plenty of places, locations in the scripture where you say, fear not, or do not be afraid, or do not fear, like here, why in the world would God have to preface his conversation with Abraham, who obviously, having conquered the kings in chapter 14, Abraham is no shrinking violet. He does okay for himself. Why would God, who already had 3 encounters with Abraham, he's aware of what the voice of God sounds like, why would he have to preface his encounter with "do not fear"? It's the same reason that every time you see "fear not" or "don't be afraid" in Scripture, because it's not just talking for their health, it's because there is genuine fear. In this instance, it's not fear of the Lord in the sense of, oh God, you're so awesome and mighty that I dare not speak with you. Abraham is a friend of God. They have a relationship. What is it possible that Avram is afraid of? I believe the answer will be revealed momentarily. But we must know that it's sufficient fear, anxiety, enough that God opens his monologue, opens the discussion with "don't be afraid, Abraham. I am a shield to you, and your reward shall be," future, right? When? Shall be very great. We get to the crux of it right there, right? How many years have gone by at this point? And God had made these promises to Abraham regarding descendants, and there still are no descendants. There is no indication that this land is going to be Abraham's. There is no indication that the descendants are going to be able to receive the land that is promised to Abraham and his descendants. Your reward will be very great. And verse 2 gives us the insight to Abraham's concern. O Lord God, respectful, what will you give me since I am childless? In other words, since after all this time I remain childless, I wasn't a spring chicken when you called me, and I'm not getting any younger, and by the way, neither is my wife. What will you give me since I am childless? And the heir of my house is Eliezer of Damascus. A little background information. In those days, if you did not have a physical heir, then one born in your house, a servant, will inherit or can inherit. So Eliezer of Damascus is the heir apparent in the absence of any physical descendants of Abraham. In other words, big talk, big promises, no deliverance. And yeah, I'm getting a little anxious. I'm getting a little uptight about it as the clock is ticking on my life and on my fertility. Behold, the word of the Lord came to him, saying, this man, Eliezer of Damascus, the servant, will not be your heir, but one who will come forth from your own body, he shall be your heir. So, remember who Abraham is, man of faith, right? Big we talk about a man of faith. Man of faith does not mean that he could not have anxiety or fear about how God's promises were going to come to fruition, or to wonder if maybe he misunderstood completely what God had promised to begin with, right? Having faith doesn't mean that you surrender your mind, you're jumping off a cliff and just believing for the sake of believing, right? You live in the real world. That's the beauty of faith. One who shall come from forth in your body, he shall be your heir. To which Abraham, or Avram, at this point, I'm sure went, that's good for me. Now I got to figure out how to make an end run about my old lady, okay? Since I know it's going to come from me, okay, but it couldn't possibly come from, her, right? But that's later, okay? That happens next chapter. And he took him outside. And he said, now look toward the heavens and count the stars, if you're able to count them. And he said to him, so shall your descendants be. So, God had asked Abram, look down, count the dust. Apparently that object lesson didn't take. Okay, so if it's not as potent an object lesson for Avram looking down, let's have him look up instead. Okay, maybe that will make a better impression. Count the stars, so your descendants will be innumerable. Then verse 6, he believed in the Lord, and God reckoned it to him as righteousness. So, of course, Paul makes a big deal about this verse, right? And we build our theology regarding faith alone. We're saved by grace through faith alone. Absolutely. But let's see, what is faith actually? Is faith completely without doubt, completely without questions? Is it okay to question God? Is it okay to wonder how he's going to pull off the promises that he had? It's absolutely okay. Right? It's absolutely all right, because we follow in the footsteps of our father, Abraham. So, reckoned as righteousness. And he said to him, I am the Lord who brought you out of Ur of the Chaldeans, Mesopotamia, to give you this land to possess it. And then Abraham, the one who believed the Lord, and the Lord counted it to him as righteousness, the man of faith, said, O Lord God, how may I know that I will possess it? Can I have a tangible inkling of your plan here? Because facts on the ground, as I look around, indicate that it's called Canaan for a reason. It's chock full of Canaanites. How am I going to possess this? Again, the man of faith say, I know you said this, but how are you going to pull that off, right? How will I know that I'll... And so God is going to act at this point, and he is going to remove all doubt from Abraham at this point, from this point on. And he's going to do so by going through enacting a covenant ratification ceremony. Now, in the ancient world, lots of covenants, we talked about that. Not only lots of covenants, but levels of covenant, okay? The agreement that I make with the kid who mows my lawn is on one level. It is in no way on the same level as the agreement that I have with the bank regarding the mortgage on my home, okay? There are levels of covenant, not seriousness, but intensity. Okay. And a more, let's say, casual covenant might be ratified simply through something like the exchange of sandals. Okay? Here's a sandal, you get a sandal, okay, well, let's walk together, right? It might be ratified simply with the exchange or the sharing of a loaf of bread, okay, breaking bread together, having a meal. It might be through salt, okay, we heard about earlier today, through the imbibing and the sprinkling of salt. It's all various. The most intensive forms of covenant, however, were ratified only in one way, and that's through blood. And what the process was, and we only know this because in the previous century, 2 centuries, we have been able, I say we, scholars, okay, on whose sandals I am not fit to untie, okay, have translated ancient Near Eastern documents that describe these sorts of covenants. And so we have the shedding of blood, the ratification of a covenant by blood, the most solemn kind of covenant there is. And you would take an animal or a series of animals, depending on your financial prosperity, and you would sever them in half, okay? You'd butcher the animal, severing it in half, and you would place one half of the corpse, the carcass, on one side of a pathway and the other side as well. And whether it's one animal that you've split or whether it's a series of animals, both parties to the covenant would walk through between the pieces, binding themselves to that covenant with the explicit... See, people are very simple and they like simple illustrations, and this is a true illustration. It's very powerful. The simple truth, the simple fact that when you walk through those severed pieces, you are binding yourself to this covenant so passionately, so severely, that if you are found breaking this covenant, if you violate the covenant, the other party of the covenant gets to do to you what has been done to the animals. Right? So it's a very solemn covenant, and you will not walk through those pieces and bind yourself, ratify yourself to that covenant unless you have every intention of carrying out the promises that you made, because violation would mean your death. But what we're going to see here with Abram and God is that this covenant is actually not made by two participants. There is a participant and there is a recipient. Right? We have an active participant and a passive recipient. Let me show you what I mean. All right. Bring me a 3-year-old heifer, God said to Abram. A 3-year-old female goat, 3-year-old ram, and a turtle dove, and a young pigeon. Wow, we've got the animals covered here. We're comprehensive ratification. And Abram brought all these to him, and cut them in two, and laid each half opposite one another, but he didn't cut the birds, which is just wring the neck of the birds, right? Slit the throat. The birds of prey came down upon the carcasses, and Avram drove them away. There's a lot of sermons that are built upon that particular verse, okay, and all the imaginative possibilities of what this verse might indicate, spiritual warfare and all kinds of things. But I think that this is there for a very specific reason, to indicate to us that this is actually happening in real time, in real life. Anybody who's been out in the wilderness, in the desert, and you kill an animal, you know that there are birds of prey who are going to be swooping down and wanting a piece of that carcass. We're demonstrating this is not a vision, this is not a dream, this is actually happening, and here was the proof. Now, when the sun was going down, a deep sleep fell upon Avram. Behold, terror and great darkness fell upon him. Abram at this point is comatose, deep sleep. If he were any more passive at this point, he'd be dead. Okay? There's only one active participant in this covenant. Abram is out of commission, right? Sleeping on the ground, comatose on the ground. God said to Avram, know for certain that your descendants will be strangers in a land that is not theirs. Yeah, that's what I'm talking about, Lord, right? How will I know that they're going to receive this land? You're telling me now they're going to be in a land that's not theirs. That's exactly what I'm worried about. And in fact, it gets worse. The news gets worse. Where they will be enslaved and oppressed 400 years. So I want to choose my words carefully, okay? In the ancient world, there was slavery and there was oppressive slavery. Slavery for most of the ancient world was part of the economy. And if one found themselves in debt, one could sell themselves into slavery. And for a particular period of time, one can be released from slavery. Later on, the Jewish, 7 years, you're released from slavery. Or you could bind yourself to serve your master for life. Remember, you get pierced. It's only really good use of an earring in Scripture, as far as I'm concerned. But that was an opinion. No extra charge. Don't have for nothing. But nonetheless, this is oppressive slavery. This is slavery that goes above and beyond economic, let's all get along slavery. This is, they'll be enslaved and they will be oppressed in that slavery. for 400 years. Where's the good news? Where's the great promise for me not to fear? Of course, Abram is receiving this. He's passive. He's not answering back. I'm answering back for him. But I will judge the nation whom they will serve, and afterward they will come out with many possessions, which will be great for that final generation coming out of slavery. Won't do much for the previous generations who are enslaved and oppressed and don't get to come out with many possessions. But as for you, you shall go to your fathers in peace. You'll be buried at a good old age. It won't affect you, Abram. What a relief, okay? It will only affect my great-great-great-grandchildren, but I'm off the hook, right? As if Abram is some kind of a baby boomer, running up the tab for our nation and leaving the debt to their grandchildren, right? As if it doesn't matter, right? Oh, sorry, I got political for a second. I'm Gen X, I'm not baby boomer. I apologize to anybody who's a baby boomer, but I'm right. But anyway, in the fourth generation, they will return here, for the iniquity of the Amorite is not yet complete. What is it that God means when he says the iniquity of the Amorite? What in the world is the iniquity of the Amorite? First of all, who is the Amorite? What in the world does this iniquity have to do? How can iniquity be complete? And what is the relationship between the descendants of Avram, the possession of the land, the release from slavery, and the iniquity of Amorite? I'm afraid for the time being I'm going to have to leave you in suspense because I want to leave 15 minutes for questions on what we have covered thus far. We've got a 15-minute, am I right? We have 15 minutes for questions? Yes, okay. So good.
Does that take questions if it takes that long? We're repeating. So those who are watching on stream, repeat the question, or
okay.
Repeat the question.
I'm happy to repeat the question. If there are questions, my presumption is that my presentation was crystal clear and therefore could not possibly elicit any questions. Proven wrong. All right.
More of a future question, but how does the Abrahamic Covenant affect the future covenant?
That's a very good question. I'm going to develop that in our next session. One of our next. I'm sorry. Thank you. How does the Abrahamic Covenant affect the future covenants? Or does it? Does it have an effect? Are future covenants in any way related to the Abrahamic Covenant, built upon, tangentially linked like Lego? What is, if any, the relationship between the future covenants that come down through Scripture and the Abrahamic Covenant? I'm afraid I will keep you in suspense. However, I will tell you, as I opened up today, that the Abrahamic Covenant is foundational to the narrative of Scripture itself and to everything that comes forward. Okay? Without the Abrahamic Covenant and a good understanding of it, it becomes very difficult to accurately interpret future events and directives and history and maybe even covenants that we see coming down. We'll talk about that. That's really important. Yeah. Can't give it all away in 1 hour, man. Yes. Did Israel ever possess all of the land that was spoken of in the Abrahamic Covenant? See, now, we at this point, okay, by this fourth encounter, we actually have not yet even seen what the boundaries are regarding it. So when we're talking about the what and the where, We have this very general at this point, well, it's a lot of land that way and this way, and, and I guess, well, here's the sea, you can't go beyond the sea there. But the short answer as to whether they've ever, the answer is no. What God has promised them in the Abrahamic Covenant has never at any time in the history of the Jewish nation. Okay, and again, from 4,000 years, from Abraham all the way to today, whatever those boundaries may wind up being, as they're revealed in Genesis, they have not enjoyed them. Yes. Yes, sir.
Well, Amorites were used as a settlement of Canaanites at the time. And so the Amorites also a particular people among Canaanites. But why is the Amorites used as a settlement?
Well, that is an excellent question, and I don't actually have a good answer for that. I mean, at the end of the chapter, I hate to blow the suspense, but you have this whole list of, Amorites and Canaanites and Jebusites and Satellites and Mosquitobites and everything else. And so the Canaanites are like a big overall cover, right, for all the specific subgroups and sub-peoples in the land. Why the Amorites are held here, why it's not Canaanite, I'm not sure. I've never been able to solve that question as to what why the Amorites are chosen, but I can only assume that the relationship of the topic, which is the iniquity, that of those satellites, Mosquitobites, Canaanites, Amorites, Jebusites, that the Amorites are at the top of the list in generating iniquity. That's my guess, but that is all that is an educated guess and nothing more. Don't take that to the bank, okay? Anyone else? All right, fantastic. Brother Greg, may I be excused? All right, thanks, Sarah. We'll pick it up at the end of